Welcome back, everybody. We're doing a Liquid Future episode here at the Unrig conference in Nashville, Tennessee. Today we have Sara Wolk from the Equal.Vote Coalition. Thank you for joining us, Sara.
Thank you for having me.
And so can you just explain at a high level what the Equal.Vote Coalition is all about?
Yeah, so the Equal.Vote Coalition is essentially dedicated to fighting for true equality in the vote itself. The voting system shouldn't play favorites. My vote shouldn't be more powerful than yours, no matter where I live, who I am, or how many candidates I support. And unfortunately, none of that's true currently.
And can you get into specifics of how the Equal.Vote Coalition, what's the solution?
Yeah, so we're promoting a voting method called star voting. And star voting uses a 5-star ballot. So you score your candidates, 5 stars for your favorite, 0 stars is your worst case scenario. And then you arrange the other candidates in between in order of preference. You can also show how much or how little you like them. So, 1 star would be better than my worst case scenario. If it came down to it, I would prefer them.
So from the voter's perspective, it's just like what you're used to in Amazon star ratings or in your App Store star rating system or in Uber or Lyft, just 1 out of 5 stars or 0 to 5 stars, right? And then what happens on the other end after you vote?
Yeah, and then after you vote, it's counted in a simple 2-step process. So you only have to vote once. The 2 highest scoring candidates are finalists, and then the finalist that you preferred gets your vote. So your ballot is your 1 vote, and the finalist preferred by a majority wins.
So just to clarify that again, you take all the star ratings and you add them up for each candidate. So if 3 people gave you 5 stars and 1 person gave you 4 stars, that would be 5, 5, 5, 4, 19. And then of the highest, the 2 highest options, then you have another round automatically using the same ballots where each person, whichever of those 2 candidates they vote higher, they get 1 vote for that person, and whichever person wins that becomes the ultimate winner. Exactly. Is that right? So star is score, then automatic runoff?
Yeah.
And so what's the benefit of this?
The benefit is really deconstructing the problem. So to me, star voting gets to the root of the problem with our current system and also with some of the other voting methods proposed, where we should be able to vote our conscience. We should never have our vote wasted. Voting your conscience shouldn't backfire. You shouldn't have to worry about voting lesser evil. You shouldn't have to worry about splitting the vote. And then the candidate with the most support should actually win.
So why would someone want to use star voting over approval voting? We were talking with people advocating for approval earlier. What's the advantage of this voting method compared to other alternative voting methods that are out there?
Yeah, so approval voting is a really simple solution. It uses the same ballot as our current method, basically just thumbs up, thumbs down on each candidate. But it doesn't allow you to show who you prefer to who, and it doesn't allow you to show how much or how little you like those candidates. So for important elections, in my opinion, I think that's data that we need in order to find the best winner. So star voting really tops the charts in terms of accuracy, and it also tops the charts in terms of resistance to strategic voting. So not only can you vote your conscience, but you should. It's statistically not going to backfire on you in general.
So just to unpack that a little bit, you're talking about the fact that star lets you have these options between 0 and 5 gives you more expressiveness than a simple thumbs up, thumbs down like approval voting. And then you're bringing in the second point, because someone might hear that and say, okay, well then what about a simple score voting method like Olympic judges uses for figure skaters, where you rank candidates 0 to 9 or 0 to 10 and you simply add up? Why do you need that automatic runoff? How does that come into play to make this even stronger voting method than the alternatives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the automatic runoff has this amazing feature, again, for combating strategic voting. So if it was just the highest scoring candidate wins, there would be a pretty strong incentive for me to give the finalist that I think can win on my side a full 5 stars, even if they're not really my favorite. because, if I'm just giving 2 stars, but none of my favorites can win, it's like, that's not a very strong vote. So star voting in the runoff, every vote is equal. It's your one ballot is your vote. So to give an example there, let's say the 2 finalists are candidates that I didn't really love. I gave one of them 2 stars, and one of them I gave a 0. I hate that guy. So it allowed me to fully support the candidates I love, but then since it's really come down to it, my full vote is going to go to that candidate that's better than the other guy.
So the automatic runoff mechanism helps voters, it kind of incentivizes voters to be a little bit more specific rather than just giving all 5s to all their candidates and all 0s to all the people they don't like. It creates this incentive to say maybe 5 and 4 have a little bit more honesty, and like you're saying, preventing that strategic voting, what they would call bullet voting with score voting, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it gives you a really strong incentive to show your preference order. So show which candidates you prefer to who, and that way in that automatic runoff, if it comes down to it, your vote can go to the finalist that you preferred.
Wonderful. Okay, so I feel like we've done a pretty good job covering what is star voting and how it works. Can we talk a little bit about the history of star voting? It's a relatively new theory, new system, right? Can you talk about where it started and where it's at right now?
Sure. Yeah. So this is where necessity is really the mother of invention. In Oregon, the Equal Vote Coalition started out, and they hosted a conference with kind of the who's who of the voting reform movement from around the country represented. So we had people there from the approval voting scene. We had people who are fans of star voting, of score voting, ranked choice voting, and they were all kind of debating, my system's better than yours because you should be able to vote your conscience, or my system's better than yours because it's more accurate. And both sides really felt like their priorities were the most important, and not delivering on that was a deal breaker. So after that conference, a couple people, Mark Frohnmeyer and Clay Shentrup, went out for beer, and they were talking about, wow, a score ballot, so like a 5-star score ballot, shows not only how much or how little do you like each candidate, but you could look at it in terms of who did you prefer to who. You could count it like it was a ranked ballot. And that's exactly what star voting does. In the first round, it looks at it like scores. And in the second round, it actually counts that same exact ballot and that same exact data as if it was a ranking. And what happens there is kind of a magical synergy where it's more than the sum of its parts. So star voting is more accurate than either, and it's more resistant to strategic voting than either. And you're better able to vote your conscience and have that really benefit you as a voter than either. So it's really a coming together of the movement. I think this is an idea that couldn't have been created without the foundation that's been laid by the ranked choice voting community, by the approval voting community. And we're really just trying to take it one step further to deliver on our goals in the most user-friendly, fair, accurate, equal, logistically viable, totally constitutional, nationally scalable option possible.
So when did all that happen, and what's the next steps?
Yeah, that was 2014. In 2016, we started organizing around some ballot initiatives. So we ran twin ballot initiatives in Multnomah County, which is the Portland, Oregon area, and in Lane County, which is the Eugene area. And in Eugene, we were able to make the ballot and ultimately got 48% of the vote with a very underfunded grassroots campaign around a brand new idea that nobody had heard of. So we fought really hard. We made a ton of progress. And even though we lost, what we found was that people are so hungry for this now that they know it's an option. we've had just like kind of a watershed even since the election of everyone was like, we thought you had this in the bag. Like, we didn't realize that this was an underdog thing. It seems so obvious. And people really feel, I think, activated by that losing by 2%. It's like, you can taste it. Everyone feels like I could have made up that difference. And so, yeah, tons of people just calling and saying, I didn't do enough, and this time I won't make that mistake again.
Yeah, and you were also telling me before we started recording about how the actual, like you're saying, underfunded, there were other similar campaigns out there that have spent much more money and did better, but the success that this campaign was able to see with such little funding, I mean, the stat you gave was 1/3 the cost for vote earned, is that right?
Yeah.
And this is all so early. I mean, I think it's got a tiny bit higher learning curve to explain than some of the other voting methods. So just speaking from my own perspective, I don't think this is any cause for discouragement in the slightest. I think if you look at how long people have been talking about and advocating different ranked choice voting methods, I mean, we're talking decades, a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And they're starting to see some serious appeal, some serious progress and traction, like the whole state of Maine. But for something that's really only formalized half a decade ago and so little organizational time to build up those organizational resources, I think that there's a lot of success moving forward. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And are there any groups right now, are there any successes that we can point to where this is being used, or places where people could go and see it being used, anything like that? I'm not sure if there are, but maybe.
Yeah, so star voting hasn't been adopted for a government election yet. Lane County would have been the first, and we're targeting City of Eugene, which has actually already voted yes. The voters in Eugene preferred it 54%. So we're going to get that referred to the ballot, let people vote again. But in the short term, the state of Washington, the organization Our Revolution, Washington Bernicrats, used star voting for their statewide endorsement elections. And they did that using our online election calculator tool. So if you just go to star.vote, that's our website. You can put in your question, which candidate do we want to endorse for this? Put in the candidates, and then it'll give you a link you can send out to all the voters. If you want to do a more secured keyed option of that, like what we did for Washington Bernicrats, you can email, and we'll set you up with a more sophisticated version. But it's a great tool that anyone can use for your own organization. Best of Eugene used it. Portland Forward used it. So it's really getting a lot of traction just in the private sector. We don't have to wait for the government to pilot this. We can pilot it ourselves.
And it's totally free to use, right? At least the unkeyed version?
Yeah, it's totally free, and it's open source.
Awesome. And so just speaking to the progress of trying to pass the ballot initiative, what was the common criticism you heard, if there were common criticism, and what sort of communities were in opposition typically? Yeah,
that's a good question. We were really lucky in that we didn't have any open opposition. So we had in the voters pamphlet, we had 9 arguments in favor. They were really strong. They were fantastic. None in opposition. But behind the scenes, we did actually have some real barriers. And what was interesting to me as an activist, as a new activist in this field, people told me, the political parties are going to oppose you. The political operatives are going to oppose you. The establishment is never going to, let you succeed here. And the barrier we actually faced was from the nonprofit sector more, and from bigger organizations in the movement itself, who were essentially kind of primarying us and saying, we are already doing another thing, and there's no room for you on the scene. So this kind of us against them, there's not enough to go around, we're competing for the same activists, for the same donors. And those are people that publicly would say nice things, but when you talk to them in private, I think, one, I sat down after months of just like trying to get a meeting. And, you know, of course, their website, their mission statement, we're doing like 110% of what they're saying they're doing. And what they told me is if you don't have $1 million and if you don't have a huge coalition of the big name organizations, that your proposal's not even worth reading.
Wow. If you like, you're welcome to name names, but I also understand if you don't want to cause any trouble.
Yeah, and I'm not going to name names there because that is just, what I think we have there is a jaded generation of veteran activists who showed up enthusiastic and believing they could make a difference, and who really have been disillusioned by the influence of polarization in politics, money in politics, corruption in politics. But I think my message to those people who told us it was impossible, and then here we are, we got 48% of the vote with a brand new idea, and the way we did that is by inspiring people. This actually delivers on the goals. So don't overthink it. People want to solve the problem.
So thinking about places to go next, do you already have the legislation crafted? Is it ready to go? If somebody was watching this and their hometown, could they copy your existing legislation and bring star voting to their, how would that work? Where would they go?
Yeah, so we do have the legislation specifically crafted for Lane County, where we ran it before, for Multnomah County, where we ran it before, and those are for non-partisan countywide elections. And then we did a quick edit to make that applicable to city council elections for Eugene. So basically, that's a template that you just need to read your local county charter or have a lawyer or somebody from our team can consult and help with that. But take a look at your charter, find out where it's talking about elections, find out which paragraph do we get rid of, what paragraph do we want to add in, and then get the formatting right. The biggest hurdle that we had, they ruled our ballot amendment was well written, it was constitutional, no worries with any of that. But like you said, star voting stands for score then automatic runoff, and that's exactly how it works. So in our original charter amendment, we wrote, passes score then automatic runoff, quote, star voting. And the ballot title we got didn't actually use the words star voting. And that's something that's not up to us to choose what's the ballot title. So little things that we've learned is like, we're never going to make that mistake again. We've made sure to change the charter amendment so it says star voting in the title. People know what we're talking about. And I think that one thing alone probably cost us the election, unfortunately.
Wow.
So devil's in the details. And definitely we have a team. There's a learning curve with that kind of initiative process. And there's little pitfalls along the way, but it's not rocket science. It's something that any aspiring activist can dig into and do. And there is a team of people from the Equal Vote Coalition that can help make sure that's done right.
And right now, do you see the path forward exclusively limited to places with a ballot initiative process with citizen referendums? Have you heard any sort of progress of elected legislators being open to passing legislation without a citizens referendum?
Yeah, and actually that's what we're hoping to do for the city of Eugene, where we've already gotten the endorsement of half of city council in the city of Eugene. We've got the most progressive city council person and the most conservative endorsement. So what's amazing about star voting is it addresses all the criticisms of elected officials over the last couple decades. So it's precinct summable. You don't have to centrally truck the ballots to a central location to count them and figure out the elimination process, which is how it works with ranked choice voting. A lot of people were concerned that that could be a security or fraud risk and that it makes auditing harder. So that's a problem that star voting solves. There's also no exhausted ballots. So in ranked choice voting, some ballots can end up, if your second choice has already been eliminated, then your vote doesn't transfer and your ballot is kind of discarded. So in star voting, every ballot is counted, no data is ignored, no data is wasted. And then the constitutionality piece, in Oregon, we're really lucky. We have a great constitution that makes voting reform legal. But in a lot of places like Maine or in Tennessee or in Texas, there's big hurdles to just legalizing democracy in the first place. And ranked choice voting, because of the details of it, can sometimes run afoul of those really technical, specific rules. And star voting, just by its nature, doesn't break those rules. So we can kind of sidestep a lot of that judicial hurdle and go straight to, really empowering legislators to say, yeah, we would like to do it better. Let's do this.
If there are more details, it would be great if you could go into more details about what are the specific constitutional problems that you're mentioning with ranked choice voting. Yeah, that's the first question.
Yeah, I'm not a total expert on that, so definitely I was talking with one of the women from Ranked Choice Maine last night. But I think, as I understand it, their constitution requires a win by plurality. And ranked choice voting guarantees a win by majority, although...
In the 10th round.
Yeah, in the 10th round. So it's a majority just of the remaining ballots, not of all the ballots. And so that ran afoul of their state constitution. And pretty much with ranked choice voting, in the first round, they'll run the numbers, they'll count the votes, and they'll end up with a plurality winner of you got the most first place votes. But then they'll retabulate, reallocate the second choice votes, and each round could actually change the winner as you go. So with star voting, there isn't that thing of like determining a winner in each round and then changing that winner as you go. It's just you determine the two highest scoring candidates, and the winner is the finalist that was preferred by a majority of voters who had a preference.
Do you know of specific examples in which an election, it's hard, I guess my question is, do you know of specific examples where an election would pick one candidate with score voting but a different candidate with star voting because the ballots do look identical from the voters' point of view?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And so score voting is essentially star voting but without the automatic runoff. And it's also highly accurate. So star voting tops the charts in terms of election accuracy out of all these proposals that are really being considered. But score voting's right there next to it. So the vast majority of the time, the winner is the same. So the highest scoring candidate is probably going to also win the runoff. But the scenario where that's not the case is the scenario where you had voters who really didn't love either of those frontrunners. And those are the voters who might have given the finalists 1 point or 2 points. And with star voting, what we say is, even though you didn't love these finalists, your vote matters just as much as anyone else's. And so your full ballot is going to be just as powerful as anybody else's. So that's where looking at the preference order allows those kind of marginalized voters to be brought back into the fold. And if their voice makes a difference, it actually can change the winner.
You've mentioned a few times about star voting and score voting are the most accurate voting method. Can you unpack what that term accuracy means, how we can measure that, how we know about that?
Yeah, so accuracy is, I think, really the most important thing. We want the winner that best represents the will of the people. But there are a few different metrics for how to measure it. And there's different metrics for measuring it depending on what voting system you're talking about. So there's no one easy answer. The metric that we use and that we like the best is called voter satisfaction efficiency. And that's something that was designed by one of the board members from the Center for Election Science, who's working at Harvard and studying statistics and doing his PhD on this stuff, or something like that. Forget the details of his credential. But voter satisfaction efficiency essentially is that the candidate who will make as many voters as possible, as satisfied as possible, should win. So the way that is studied is using simulated elections. So they actually ran thousands and thousands of elections with all the different voting methods and across tons of different scenarios. So what happens if we have 2 candidates? What happens if we have 10 candidates? What happens if we have polarized factions? What happens if we have strategic blocks that are voting in lockstep? And that's a really incredible piece of data. So what it showed is that our current system is in the trenches. It's really the least accurate voting method out there, besides just like monarchy. Rolling the dice. And then a big step up is ranked choice voting. But in terms of accuracy, star voting is another step further. So 98% accurate when voters are honest, and honest voting is incentivized.
And so just to unpack that 98% number, does that mean that the regret is the voter satisfaction efficiency that's missed is 2%? Or is it saying that in 100 simulations, 98 of the simulations end up selecting the person who most wins? Just to understand that better.
Yeah, so it's basically a percent. So like 98% of the time, star voting would pick the best winner, the perfect winner. And then the cool thing about star voting is the other 2% of the time would be like in a near dead tie or 3-way tie scenario, where if it didn't elect the person who's like absolutely perfect, it's somebody who had almost the exact amount of support. So it's a really close scenario there. And no voting system is perfect, so there's no such thing as a voting method where you can't vote strategically. There's no such thing as a voting method that's 100% perfectly accurate in every scenario. But really topping the charts there is something that we're proud of. It's something that we were really validated by, because before we had that study back, we were like, wow, this is incredible. We're inspired. It makes sense when you think about it. So just getting that data back, it took us from being, oh, wow, yeah, that sounds like a cool idea out of Oregon, to being like, maybe we should take these guys seriously and take a closer look at this proposal.
Wonderful. And so just to speak a little bit to your personal history, as much as you want to share, don't need to go into too many details, but you were saying earlier before we started recording that you've been working on voting reform for some time, and before this you were interested in other methods. Do you want to speak to that at all? I think it'd be really interesting to see how you've been studying this for a while and you've evolved, and right now this is what's the most exciting.
Yeah, I think my personal story here is really relatable. I found out about ranked choice voting years ago, and I was so inspired. I was like, oh my God, vote splitting, the spoiler effect, these are horrific problems that nobody's talking about, and we can solve them. I'm on board. So I kind of put it on the back burner. I pinned that brochure to my wall, and I was like, I'm going to come back around to this. So I spent years talking to everyone who would listen about ranked choice voting, really sharing the message, and especially like voting your conscience and eliminating the spoiler effect were the pitch that I gave. But when Trump was elected, I moved back to my hometown, to Portland, Oregon, and I was like, I'm going to get involved. So I showed up at the first meeting for Ranked Choice Voting Oregon, and there was about 100 people in the Central Library, And it turned out that about a third of the people in that room were stoked on approval voting, and about a third were stoked on score voting, and about a third were stoked on ranked choice voting. And we were like, well, we want to get an initiative on the ballot, but we don't want to pick the wrong one, and we don't want to go into this without consensus among our movement itself. So what we decided to do was have an intensive education process. So we formed a committee, we started a research project where we researched all the different voting methods, pros and cons, determined our metrics for comparing them, which were equality, accuracy, honesty, simplicity, and expressiveness. And then at the end of that process, we called a big public vote where we all voted on, it was actually came down to star voting versus ranked choice voting. And but okay, so rewinding a little, before we got to that vote, I came out swinging. I was like, hey, ranked choice voting's amazing. It has a national movement. It solves all the problems. Why are you coming in here with a new idea, shaking things up? And what I learned really woke me up. They were like, ranked choice voting doesn't actually eliminate vote splitting. It only mitigates it in some scenarios. But if there's 3 or more viable candidates, a third-party candidate can actually kind of create a glass ceiling for third-party candidates. There are exhausted ballots, so some votes get wasted, and it's not actually super highly accurate. It's one of the less accurate out of the whole family of alternative voting systems. So I kind of came out swinging. We had a is not is to moment there that I'm not super proud of, and I tried to be open-minded. And that was when we realized, wow, these are valid concerns. It's not just the establishment trying to knock us down.
So we had a quick interruption, now getting back into it again. So we were just talking about your personal history. You've been involved and working on and advocating around alternative voting methods for a long time, many years, and you've come to see star voting as the most promising path forward. So can you just go into more details about what that's like, how you came to this perspective?
Yeah, so I was out in my mom's garden one day building some raised beds, and a canvasser came by from the Green Party, and he was like, hey, have you heard of ranked choice voting? It eliminates vote splitting. It eliminates wasted votes, and so it solves this problem. We could actually have like fair, accurate elections. And my mind was blown. I was like, wow, I've been talking about this problem, and I didn't realize we had a proposal that could solve it. So I went out into the world for years and told everyone that I met about ranked choice voting, about voting reform, how critical it is to solve this problem of the spoiler effect, vote splitting in particular. And after Trump was elected, I got directly involved with a group that had just formed. We were trying to get an initiative on the ballot. And at that first meeting that I came to, there was about 100 people. And I think we all expected everyone to be like, yeah, ranked choice voting, let's do this. But what we found is that the election reform community was pretty evenly split between fans of approval voting and score voting, and also ranked choice. And all of those factions had some really legitimate arguments. And so the approval voting people were like, we need it to be logistically viable, tabulated using basic addition. We need it to be really accurate. And the score voting people were like, we want to be able to show our preference, but yeah. And the ranked choice voting people were like, score voting has some strategic issues that can be like gameable, and that's a deal breaker. Everyone was like, your idea is to, great idea, but that's a deal breaker. And this guy from Eugene had driven up to Portland to share what later became star voting. It was a brand new idea, and what it is a hybrid of a score ballot with basically a ranked choice style instant runoff for a second round. And it turns out that kind of accomplishes the goals of both sides without the flaws of either. So we were all like, okay, well, that's kind of out of left field. This is interesting, but we're in a hurry. We just want to get something passed. We're ready. There's already movement. Why don't we just do that? That was my perspective, and that was what I argued passionately. And what I realized is this guy, Aaron Wolf, he was like, give me your elevator pitch for ranked choice voting. Why do you love it? And so I said, I want to be able to vote my conscience. I want my vote to never be wasted. And I want the candidate with the most support to actually win. And he was like, yeah, that's what I want too. But ranked choice voting, false. Yeah. So I kind of had this defensive moment, and then I had a combative moment, and then I was like, I'm going to do my homework. That can't be right. And
the stages of grief.
I know, I fact-checked him, and then I re-fact-checked him, and I was like, wow, he's right. Oh, my God. And Fair Vote has since updated their website, so they don't make those claims quite like they used to anymore. But essentially, we reverse engineered it. We were like, that's the pitch I want to be able to give, and if ranked choice voting can't deliver, what can? So we did a 4-month process. We vetted all the voting systems, and the one that best delivered on our goals was star voting, which at that time was brand new. It was invented right there in Eugene just a couple years before. So we decided to dream big and go for it. We rebranded it, gave it the name Star Voting. We did a bunch of marketing, did a bunch of education. We had all really crafted our own pitches just in arguing with each other over that process to choose the best voting method. And as a community, we hosted a big public thing. We voted on which one do we want to pursue as a group, and Star Voting won. So fast forward 2 years, and we had 2 ballot initiatives, and a nationally viable campaign.
What voting method did you use to decide between the different voting methods?
That's a fantastic question. So by the time we actually had the vote, it had pretty much been narrowed down to ranked choice voting or star voting. Pretty much the approval voting and score voting people pretty quickly came on board to yeah, we do want star voting. And also it allows us to answer the criticisms of the ranked choice voting people instead of just arguing with them. So, and then realizing that ranked choice doesn't actually eliminate vote splitting. It doesn't, your vote can still be wasted. Your ballot can be exhausted. That information really won over me, and then kind of a flood of people got won over. So by the time we did the vote, it was an approval vote because we only had 2 options, so totally fine.
Most plurality vote. Does it choose only one vote?
No, we did approval. So
you can choose both?
The difference is some people voted yes to either. Some people, nobody voted no to either. But they could have. And a sound majority chose star voting.
That's really cool for the alternative voting method reform movement. If star vote is this mythical voting method that everyone can regain consensus around, because there is sort of this under the surface civil war right now between the ordinal and cardinal methods a little bit. So I love that story. If this is the promised land, that it meets what the activists are excited about. It also meets what the legislators are excited about, as you said. I think the name is really marketable as well. There's something great about the fact that star both describes what it looks like to the voters, 5 stars, And so it's very memorable in that sense. And it also has the abbreviation of this is what the algorithm is, score, then automatic runoff. So I think there's a lot to like there, for sure. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, thank you. We're really proud of all that. Worked hard on it.
Okay, so other questions. Where should we go from here? What are we forgetting to ask? What's not being said? Is there any concern about the ballot machines themselves being able to handle it, just because it is a little bit different method than people are used to? Or, I mean, humans can count it relatively easily. It doesn't need to be electronically counted. It depends on the size of how many people are voting. But yeah, have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, it is just counted with basic addition. So we just did a big demo election with all paper ballots for endorsing our revolution in Lane County. Endorsed Bernie Sanders. But we have, so for real government elections in Oregon, the way that's done is we use vote by mail. So we have a paper ballot. Those paper ballots are sent in to voting machines. A non-partisan board of volunteers runs all that through the voting machines, and it's tabulated. And star voting could be counted using that exact same process and using, in most cases, the exact same voting machines we already have. So you probably wouldn't have to buy new voting machines. It's really not more complicated than Scantron-type technology. In some cases, just to get the ballot formatted and looking pretty, you would need a software upgrade that can help you do the runoff. But that's just, a paragraph of code. We actually have a proof of concept on that's been drafted, and we've been in communication with Clear Ballot, who does the voting machines in Oregon. So that's one area for ranked choice voting that's been a big barrier. I think in Tennessee it was passed by voters, but then they were like, we can't logistically do this. And so it got repealed or something. But yeah, the logistics are just fantastic for star voting. Not only can you use existing ballot machines, voting machines, but it's locally tabulatable, which means that each precinct can count their ballots. And that is really an important feature for security, auditability, and transparency of understanding the results once you do get that ballot data back election night.
Just to dig into that a little bit more about the precinct summability, I can totally understand how the first round is precinct summable. It'd be very easy to say, here are 7 candidates, here's their total number of stars, here's their total. How do you also handle the second round? Is it most commonly done that you first find out who was eliminated from the first round, and then all the precincts say, okay, of these last 2, here's what the sums would be? Or does the precinct report up each of the head-to-head races, which is going to... Exactly. Each of the head-to-head?
Yeah. So what it looks like is a preference matrix, so a graph that's got... all the candidates on one side, all the candidates again on the top, and then you have a number in each little square that's like, between me and you, 8 voters preferred you, 4 preferred me. Between you and him, 16 preferred him, and 8 preferred you. And so no matter which 2 candidates are the finalists, the ballots already show who was preferred to who. And locally, we can just plug in that information, send that up the chain, and aggregate it with everybody else's data. But that local tabulation, that ability to count our own local results before we send it up to a central counting processing facility is critical for us to be able to say, what do you mean Portland voted for Donald Trump? Like, this is a super progressive city. That's suspicious. We want to do an audit. Whereas if you're mixing all the data together before you can make sense of it, you don't have that accountability of saying, wait, something doesn't add up.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So the ballot looks like, here's the total number of stars for the first round for each of the 10 candidates, and then here's a square, a matrix 10 by 10 of if this candidate ran against this candidate in the next round. And
or like the election tabulation results.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Very cool. And I'm just trying to figure this out now. I'm not 100% clear on this, but I think it's the case that star voting works really well for under, let's say, 20 candidates. Is it possible that it would become really difficult if you were to have 200 candidates? Do you know what I mean? Whereas approval voting in theory could work for 200 candidates, or score voting. I mean, you comment on that.
Yeah, actually, so star voting, I think where it really shines is that it's highly accurate with any number of candidates in the race. And hopefully we won't ever have an election with hundreds and hundreds of candidates, because that's just too many to really learn about. But the critical thing for election accuracy when you do have a big field of candidates and multiple viable candidates is the ability to show no preference between two of them. So let's say there's 12 fantastic, wonderful, incredible candidates. You want to be able to say, I love any of them. And then, so approval voting, score voting, star voting, I think they all do really well in big fields of candidates, whereas other systems really break if there's any more than two. Our current voting system, in contrast, is only accurate if there's two candidates in the race. If there's three, you can end up with like a Ralph Nader scenario where the election fails. With ranked choice voting, if there's three viable candidates, it can fail, like it was repealed in Burlington, Vermont after an election. And I think something similar happened in Aspen, Colorado as well. So that to me is critical. We need to be able to have a voting system that is still accurate with a number of candidates in the race.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there ever any question, just to your point about you want to be able to specify those specific preferences, is there ever any debate about is 5 the right number of stars? Should we have 10 stars? Should we have 25 stars if there are 25 candidates? Just so that, because in a traditional ranked choice ballot, you do have that preferentiality expression for each number of candidates, whereas in the stars, we've been talking about 5 stars, you have 5 options. So does that ever come up?
Yeah, so as I understand it, your question is like star voting, you can score the candidates from 0 stars all the way up to 5 stars. But what if it was 0 to 10 or 0 to 100? How would that impact things? And essentially when this proposal first came to Portland, first came to me, they were talking about a 0 through 9 star ballot. And I kind of looked at this like sea of bubbles on the sample ballot, and I was like, that looks confusing. So there is an upper limit to just what looks okay and is functional on a ballot. And then there's a lower limit where if you're reducing it to just a binary like approval voting, you're only getting so much data. You're not getting enough data to be like top shelf accuracy. So what we really found is you kind of want to balance those two conflicting criteria, simplicity versus expressiveness. And the 5-star ballot is kind of that perfect middle ground where you're really able to express your preference order, you're able to show who you prefer to who, but it's also still quite simple. And the 5-star ballot allows, there's an argument about tactical voting or strategic voting where you might want to give your candidates higher scores than you actually, than your real opinion, or lower scores than your actual opinion. And having a smaller field of ballots actually mitigates the effect that that type of strategic voting can have on the outcome. So, it really, I think, is the perfect balance kind of between conflicting factors.
Yeah, there's one more advantage that I was thinking about versus a traditional instant runoff or ranked choice ballot where you can mess up instant runoff ballot. You can mess up if you say you have 3 columns here, of the 10 candidates, who's your first choice in one column, mark who your second choice is in the second column, and your third choice in the third column. You might put 3 people all in the first column, and now your ballot has to be thrown out because it's invalid.
Yeah.
But as far as I understand, any of the cardinal methods, you can't really screw up the ballot at all, so you never have to throw that away. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty incredible with star voting. You know, if you want to vote just how you do today, you can give your favorite 5 stars and be done with it. If you want to rank the candidates in order, you can go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you want to vote against somebody, you can give them 0 stars and give everybody else 5. If you want to only support your favorite, you can do the opposite. So, yeah, there really isn't, there aren't really very many ways you can mess up your ballot. Obviously, you can scribble all over it or spill your coffee, or you can...
You give one candidate 2 different stars.
Yeah, and I think what we would encourage is, if that happened, for there to be like a system in place for determining which one is determined. Yeah, I think that makes sense, at least in non-governmental elections generally. But yeah, you can also like cross out a messed up vote and initial it and put the correct thing, and then put a note that says, this is what I meant to do, even on governmental ballots. But yeah, star voting, you can't really mess it up. Just vote your conscience.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we've covered a good amount of material. Just last point is, where can people go to learn more? Where can people learn about your organization, about the method? What's next?
Yeah, so starvoting.us is our website, and there's a lot of resources there under the Learn tab, FAQ. We've got some great videos. We've got, like I said, the election calculator. So if you want to use star voting for yourself, that's star.vote, and super user-friendly platform for hosting a vote. And then the Equal Vote Coalition is our organization. That's our 501c3, and the website for that is equal.vote. So we're fundraising right now. We're campaigning. We have a ton of resources for chapters all over the country that if we have activists that want to do something, we've got resources to help them pull that off. And we encourage everyone to get involved, get educated, spread the word.
Are there any newsletters? Is there social media? What about that?
Yeah, we've got an email list, so definitely sign up for that to get our newsletter. We've got Facebook is really strong, star voting. You can find star voting on Facebook, on Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, Snapchat.
Tumblr?
Not Tumblr. But if you want to be our Tumblr point person, you can totally set that up.
And the last one is, where could people find the model legislation that you've used in Oregon already?
So on our website, starvoting.us, under the Learn tab, I think the bottom option under that tab is ballot initiative, and we've got the initiative text from the previous measures. You also can just send us an email at team@equalvote. That's our collective email address, and we definitely encourage anyone to just email us so we can help out.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to do this and share, and keep at it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for all your work you're doing with Liquid Democracy.
Totally.